Welcome to Russian History Retold, a special edition episode, The Cold War Spy Swap, a podcast swap with Lindsey Graham's History Daily. On February 10th, 1962, at the height of the Cold War, the United States and the Soviet Union conduct a spy exchange. Learn more about this from our friends at History Daily, a podcast that you can find on any of your favorite podcatchers. History Daily tells the fascinating stories of what happened on this day in history. New episodes come out every weekday. There's a broad mix of history, from famous battles to fashion firsts. There's medicine, science, technology, religion, politics, sports, everything that made us who we are today. Discover amazing facts you've never learned before about history. And even if you think you know a certain day's events, well, you might be surprised. History is human. History Daily finds the overlooked and often forgotten human stories behind the names and dates of ordinary history. Enjoy today's special edition episode. Check out History Daily, and join us next time when we start a new series on the transition from Russia to the Soviet Union and back. Spasiba za vнимание.
I grew up in the 70s and 80s with movies like Red Dawn and Rocky IV informing my view of the Cold War. There was also Firefox, wherein burnt-out pilot Clint Eastwood is smuggled into the Soviet Union to steal a top-secret, super-advanced warplane. It's perfect propaganda from the era. A coldly menacing Soviet war machine has developed a superweapon, but a lone, plucky American is going to steal it. But first, he has to learn how to think in Russian, because a plane is flown by brainwaves. It's ridiculous and it's fun, two things the real Cold War definitely was not. But the period of superpower tension that stretched from the end of World War II into the early 1990s was certainly fascinating, and the podcast we're featuring today proves it. Cold War Conversations tells untold stories of the Cold War from those on the front lines, eyewitnesses who have often never shared their stories in audio before. Every week, Cold War Conversations interviews a participant in the Cold War, a soldier, a spy, a pilot or dissident, people who experienced the Cold War personally. Today's episode is a conversation with Rick Shreve, a United States Air Force F-111 pilot based in the UK during the Cold War. You'll hear about his early career as a fighter pilot, and then his transfer to the F-111, a plane that, while not as advanced as the Firefox, there's no brainwave controls apparently, but still a remarkable piece of military engineering. And Rick was trained to fly it, to carry out missions against Warsaw Pact forces in Europe, including using nuclear devices to attack targets in the Soviet Union and East Germany. Thankfully, that mission never came. So please enjoy this episode from the podcast Cold War Conversations. We put some links in the episode notes, so be sure to search for and follow Cold War Conversations for more.
I mean, we were told when we got there that our goal in life was to survive a week, take as many of them with us as we could before we'd go, and try to make them use as many of their expendables as we could, and that the follow-on forces from the States would win the war.
Did you believe that?
If it had happened, yeah.
This is Cold War Conversations. If you're new here, you've come to the right place to listen to first-hand Cold War history accounts. Do make sure you follow us in your podcast app so that you don't miss out on future episodes. Rick Shreve was a US Air Force F-111 pilot based at RAF Lakenheath in the UK. We hear about his early Air Force career as a fighter pilot, and then we move on to his transfer to the F-111 and how he was trained to carry out nuclear as well as conventional missions against the Warsaw Pact forces in Europe. He describes his low-level training missions to attack targets in the Soviet Union and East Germany, where he recalls a near-fatal incident amongst the Scottish lochs. Rick was also part of one of the crews that flew on Operation El Dorado Canyon, the operation to bomb Libya in April 1986 in retaliation for the West Berlin discotheque bombing 10 days earlier. Rick gives you a very frank and honest view of his role in the US Air Force and his approach to the huge responsibilities he carried. In his later career, he flew civil airliners with Pan Am and recalls how he was astonished to fly over the Warsaw Pact airfield he had been tasked to attack in the event of war. Now, if you have listened this far, I know that you are enjoying the podcast, so I'm asking for one-off or monthly donations to support my work and enable me to continue producing the podcast. If you become a monthly supporter via Patreon, you will get the sought-after Cold War Conversations coaster as a thank you and bask in the warm glow of knowing that you are helping to preserve Cold War history. Just go to coldwarconversations.com/donate. If a financial contribution is not your cup of tea, then you can still help us by leaving written reviews wherever you listen to us, as well as sharing us on social media. So, back to today's episode. I'm delighted to welcome Rick to our Cold War conversation.
Originally, I was planning on going to the Naval Academy, and for various and sundry reasons, I ended up getting out of high school when I was 16, and you had to be 17 to go to the academy. So my representative, and that's one of the people that can give you an appointment to the academy, told me to go ahead and go to college for a year, then come back, and he'd give me we'd deal with it then. Went down to Texas, looked around at Texas A&M, which at the time was a boys' school and a military school. On our way back up, stopped by at Baylor in Waco. Nice campus, friendly people, plus they had girls. And at that time, in the early 70s, A&M was boys' school. So I figured, well, I'll go here for a year and then go apply to the Naval Academy. So while I was there, I got offered a full ride scholarship with the Air Force and decided to stay. So that's how I ended up there. So I kind of backed into it, to be honest with you.
Can you take me through some of the training that you had there?
It's probably like, your air cadet squadrons there with the RAF, some academics, drill, things that you'd probably do in boot camp, they do in the 4 years that you're there. And then between your sophomore and your junior year, you have 3 years of college in the States. So between the second and the third year, you go to a 4-week summer camp, and they just kind of increase the intensity a little bit. And you get what's called a dollar ride. We get to go up in an airplane just to see if you like it. And then you graduate and you get your commission and you go to whatever professional training or whatever your job is going to be in the Air Force. They send you to training for that after you graduate and actually come on board.
Right. So presumably they saw your suitability as a pilot at this point or not?
Oh, well, yeah. One thing I forgot, the summer between your junior and your senior year, between year 3 and year 4, you go to primary flight training. And this is in the States, they contract this out to civilians. So you just go to a local airport, get in a 150 and fly up to the point to where you get your private pilot's license. It's about 40 hours. So you solo, you get your private pilot's license. And to be honest with you, this is where most of the people get washed down, is at that point. It seems strange, but the simpler the airplane is, it seems like the harder it is to fly.
So then you move on to more advanced aircraft and more advanced training.
Right. This was 74 when I graduated, and they were starting to do a reduction in force called a RIF, and they were dumping guys out with 1,000 hours of combat time. And they had been putting through flight school classes that numbered in the hundreds. The class I went through was 20. I had to wait a year before I could get into flight school, so I was a cop for a year in the Air Force. And then after a year, my actual flying training started.
Tell me about the flying training.
Flying training back then, it was in 2 phases. The first phase was T-37. It's side by side. It was kind of like the Jet Provost, except had 2 engines. That's where you actually learned to fly, was in the T-37. And you got trained to the point to where you could actually pass the air transport pilot license test for the FAA. So it was instruments, formation, flying, general aircraft handling. Then after about 4 to 5 months, you transitioned into the T-38. And back then, everybody went through the T-38, and that was more of a fighter-type aircraft. It would go supersonic, tandem seat, again, formation, instrument flying, general aircraft handling. And it was during the time you were in the T-38 where they decided what type of airplane you were going to get. The theory back then was that you were universally assignable. If you made it through the T-37 and T-38, you could fly anything. That wasn't necessarily the case, and they changed that now, where after the first half of training now in the Air Force, you're split off into fighter or tanker transport.
And did you feel that you had quite a gift in terms of your flying ability? Did you find it quite easy and you were quite confident?
No. I had to work at it, to be honest with you. And to be honest with you, I was kind of surprised I got a fighter out of there. I got an F-4 when I graduated. Then after you got out of flight school, they sent you to a program called Fighter Lead In. It was about a month. It was in New Mexico. It was T-38s, but they had you could drop bombs and stuff like that. It was just basic fighter maneuvers, basic bombing, a little more formation just to see if, just to get you ginned up a little bit without having to pay the cost of flying an F-4 at the initial part. Then after that, I went to F-4 RTU training in MacDill, F-4Es, and got some of the best training I ever had in my life. F-4 was probably the best airplane for a new fighter pilot to go to because you did everything. You did nukes, you did ground attack, you did air-to-air, you did intercept. So you learned it all. Then after that, I was transferred to Seymour Johnson, Fort Tech Fighter Wing, which interestingly enough, the 3 squadrons there had started down as Eagle squadrons in the RAF. And we were an air-to-air wing. And this is where, and this is typical Air Force, I was a really good air-to-air pilot. Cannot understand why. I just got it. And it's something either you got or you don't. Because it's such a complex, 3-dimensional, high speed. You got to keep track of where everybody is. And a lot of guys just can't handle all the inputs and the thought process that goes into it. I got it. I couldn't teach it. I was worthless in debriefs because it came naturally to me. And I found that if you're a natural at something, you can't teach it because you don't know why you do what you do. Now, I was a terrible bomb dropper. I mean, when I first started, the only reason the bomb hit the ground was because of gravity. But I got to where I was really good at it, but I had to work at it. And so I had to work at it. I was really good at teaching it. I could teach bombing. Couldn't teach air-to-air for nothing.
Right.
Now, they used to give us these little microphones, and we take off, and you're supposed to turn it on and talk about what you're doing and what you see. See Top Gun?
Yeah.
Well, when they're debriefing and all that, that's pretty much what you do. You get back there, you fly for, air-to-air mission, and that was probably 30 minutes. But it was like 30 minutes pulling 5 and 6 Gs, and you come back and you feel like somebody beat you with a baseball bat. But so you come back and you spend 2 or 3 hours debriefing the flight, and you're supposed to play back your recorder, so you say, okay, this is where we are, this is what he's doing, this is what I'm doing. And all mine was me grunting and cussing the guy. And and they would ask me, why did you do this? And I go, yeah, I don't know. It seemed like the thing to do at the time. So since I really had a gift for it, that was the last time I ever flew air-to-air. We switched to about the year after I got to Seymour Johnson. We got our mission changed from air-to-air to ground attack and nuke. Now, that was a real morale builder right there. And we got matched up with squadrons in Ramstein, and we'd go over there in the summer and set nuke alert.
And this was with the F-4 Phantom, yeah?
Yeah, with the F-4s, yeah.
So you were over in Germany with the F-4 as well?
No, I was supposed to be, but by the time it took us a year to transition, probably 6 to 9 months to transition from air-to-air to nuke, because they're real picky about nukes.
I can imagine. You can imagine them being picky, can't you?
It was, I'll be honest with you, it was the most miserable experience of my life. We worked 12, 13-hour days, 6, 7 days a week for 6 months in a row without a day off to get ready for our initial nuke evaluation. And that thing, one guy messes up, whole wing fails.
Wow.
So no pressure. And you had to do a thing that we called it stump the dummy. But what it was is you brief you had a line, a mission, and you'd get up and you'd brief what you're going to do, how you're going to get there. Pilot would talk about what he expected to see visually. Wizzo would talk about what he expected to see on the radar, how we were going to deliver our weapons. And then nuclear certifications, that's what they were called. Each crew had to do one. And then there was like a table full of experts around the table after you did your briefing. And each one of these guys, like you'd have like a weapons guy, you'd have a maintenance guy, you'd have a plans guy. They didn't know crap about anything other than their own little bailiwick. And after you did your briefing, you'd stand up there, and I mean, I've been up there for like 2-3 hours answering questions, and not looking at anything. Just you're supposed to know it.
Was there any sort of extra psychological evaluation with nukes or not?
I think that probably comes under don't ask questions you can't stand the answer to. It was a different world back then. I mean, I went back to Lakenheath a couple of years ago, and some of the people went and said, "Well, they're going to have you talk to the pilots?" And I went, "Yeah, no. We're like pirates to them. The culture has changed so much that they don't want us speaking to these guys." Yeah, I mean they kind of probably played a little bit more attention to you as not the fighters. They didn't. They pretended like they did, but they didn't. We were not a deep introspective group. I mean, pretty much what you saw was what you got.
I just wanted to go quickly back to the training side, because I understand you were training with some royalty as well.
Yeah, the flight school class, half of it, like I say, they were like, we started out with 20 Americans and it got culled down to about 15. Then they dumped a bunch of Kuwaitis in with us. And it included a crown prince of Kuwait, Al Sabah, I believe his name was. And that was different. Those guys were... We had a bunch of Iranians on base too, and you talk about two groups of people who just hated each other's guts. The Kuwaitis and the Iranians couldn't stand each other. We'd have to play soccer since they, was part of our athletic program, which we hated. But I mean, that's the only thing they knew how to play. And they'd spend time fighting as opposed to playing soccer. Well, we just kind of watch them and wonder what the big deal was. But yeah, he was there. Oh, one interesting story, though. When we did our nuclear certification, they brought some guys over from NATO in USAFE, Air Forces Europe, to do the certification since we were going to actually be sitting alert over in Germany. And so I'm up there, and we're doing okay. And then this plans guy from NATO goes, Captain Shreve, why don't you just basically summarize the contents of NATO op plan Mukti Muck. I'm sitting there thinking a minute. And I'm sitting there thinking, I don't have any earthly idea what this guy's talking about. And I'm just getting ready to start tap dancing and BSing this guy. And so I looked at my wisdom and said, "You heard of that?" And he goes, "No." I looked at him and said, "Major, I don't have any earthly idea what you're talking about." And the wing commander, you could just see him like melt. Because he thought, okay, this is it. This moron has cost the wing our certification. But then the NATO plans guy looks over at our plans guy and says, "Y'all did get that, Ted. It's a new pub." And said, "No, so we haven't gotten it." He goes, "Well, Captain, I guess you wouldn't know it, would you?" And I went, "Yeah, I guess not."
Wow, it's a good job you didn't go down the BS route.
Well,
then,
it was it was mighty tempting.
Brilliant stuff. So with the F4, I mean, you end up as an instructor, don't you, at some point?
I was a simulator instructor in F4s. And then after F4s, I got sent to be a T-37 instructor in Reese Air Force Base in Lubbock. I was an instructor there for 3 years. And then after that, I was fully expecting to go back to the F4 or hopefully an F-15. But then for some reason, they decided I'd be really good for an F-111, which I wasn't thrilled about because they had them stationed over at Cannon Air Force Base, which is about 100 miles away from Lubbock. And they just didn't. They were just having so much trouble with the planes and the engines and the airframes. They just didn't fly. I mean, they'd sat for months without turning a wheel. But then they said I was going to go to Lakenheath in England. I went, yeah, okay. I'm going to sit around somewhere. I just didn't sit around over there. So I got transferred over there, and we had the F model 111s, and that was probably the best model we had, and we flew a lot. We didn't have the trouble that they had with the D models at Canon.
How different is it flying an F-111 versus the F-4?
It's a different airplane. It's a different culture. It's a different mindset. F4, man, the first thing you want to do is dump your bombs and start hassling. You know, you want that air-to-air kill if you can. F-111, it's, you know, drop your bombs, run away. It had zero air-to-air capability. I mean, unless you're like fighting a space shuttle or something, you might have a chance with that. But other than that, you're a bomb dropper.
I think I read there was an interesting defensive maneuver called torching.
Well, torching and biffing. Torching is tonight. In the F-111, the dump mast is in between the burner cans when you dump fuel. So what we do at night, if we were bored or if somebody was chasing us at night or at air shows, was you start dumping fuel and you light one of the afterburners and you get about a 40-foot flame shooting out of the back of the plane. I mean, it's the most awesome thing that you can see. I mean, the burners on the the F-111 are impressive to begin with. You can see them in the daytime. The burners coming out. And then you have about a 40, 50-foot flame come out of the back end of that thing. That'll get your attention. Plus, it'll blind you at night if somebody's behind you. And then the other thing is a lot of times we carried retarded bombs, the bombs with parachutes on them.
Mm-hmm.
And if somebody was behind us, the defense we were going to use is we were going to drop one off. So it would, you know, she'd come out and fall behind us and it'd blow up in front of him.
And that was really the only...
Yeah. Well, our defense was the terrain following radar and speed. Because we'd go like a striped-butted monkey. And there wasn't anything that could catch us down.
Like a what? Did you say?
Striped-butted monkey, sorry. It's just a term we used. It'd go
That's
really
brilliant.
fast.
That's a great term. I might be using that in the future.
Well, you can edit this part out. The real term is a striped-ass ape, but...
Oh, yeah, you don't need to censor for this show. Don't worry.
You can take out what you want to take out.
Don't worry, Rick. Because I understand the F-111 was the only plane without an airspeed limit, or is that a myth?
And again, I may be mistaken on this. It's been so long since I looked into the Dash 1, but I believe it didn't have a Q limit. It had a temperature limit. It started to burn up, and there was a warning light in the cockpit that all it said was slow down. There was a temperature sensor on the skin of the airplane, and there was actually a little gauge that showed you how high it was getting. And when it got too hot, the slow down light would come on. I got to come on one time, but that was it.
So, what was the sort of limit you managed to take an F-111 to?
It was between Christmas and New Year's, and you guys shut down. I mean, RAF's flying club. So between Christmas and New Year's, you guys just took the rest of the year off. Us, we had to go fly and burn off all the excess gas we had as opposed to saving it for the next year because it was a budget thing. So we just go, we couldn't get on the range, couldn't fly low level, couldn't do anything. So we're just out there drilling holes in the sky. And I was up with a Wizzo one time and we're cruising along. We're just, trying to figure out something to do to kill the time. I went, how fast you ever been? He says, probably 1.5, 1.6. I went, man, let's see how fast this thing will go. So talked to Scottish military radar. I don't know if you're aware of it, but in the UK back then there was civilian radar control, air traffic control, and then there was military air traffic control.
Right.
And we dealt with the military guys. So where we were, it was Scottish military radar. And so he just points us out toward Norway and says, let her rip. And we got 2.02 when the paint started burning off.
Wow.
And I've had it down to, I think I was going 1.2, 1.3 at 100 feet at red flag one time.
At 100 feet off the ground?
Yeah. Oof. Now that you can tell, that you can tell you're going fast.
You got to trust in your terrain following radar for that, surely.
I was hand flying that one. You can only go down 200 feet with the TFRs.
Hand flying at 100 feet?
Yeah.
Whoa.
Yeah. That's what I got paid for.
Yeah.
Other than that, they have Monkey do it.
The buttered monkey.
Yeah.
Wow. That's incredible. What were your first impressions of the UK when you arrived?
Like living in the States in the 40s.
Yeah.
It's like you never knew what your telephone number was because, it's like my phone number where we live was Castle Acre 241. But the numbers, you dial depending on where you were. You had to go in the call box and get out the little chart, and it told you what, prefix numbers you had to use, based upon where you're calling from. And you could actually hear the mechanical switches click over as it went through the transfer stations.
Yeah.
To finally get to where you were going. And we got mail twice a day. That was nice. And nobody ever did anything on the phone. It was always by letter.
Yeah.
But we made a conscious effort. We lived in this great big old, we call it a mansion, big old country house about 20 miles outside of the base. We made a conscious effort that we were going to live amongst the natives. So we lived in this house. We were the only Americans in the village. It was a little village called Sporl up near Swaffham. Sent my kid to English schools. I was the number 3 employer in the village, the pub and the school. But we loved it. I mean, it took a while to get used to it. Like, first thing that we noticed when we'd go out, in the States, you go out, you go eat, you go to a movie, go do this, you do 2 or 3 things in the evening. I don't know what it's like now, but back in the 70s, man, when you booked a table, you booked it for the night. And they were in no rush. In U.S. restaurants, man, it's okay, eat, get out, so I can turn this table and get some more people in. I mean, UK, you just come in and it's yours. And it was a more leisurely, laid back pace of life. And it took us about 6 months to get used to it. But once you did, I really liked it. And natives were friendly and they kind of spoke the language. So other than, driving on the wrong side of the road, it was pretty nice.
Did you get a US car shipped over?
I had an MG shipped over. I had an MG in the States, and it was left-hand drive. And then we got a Mazda, Brit Mazda over here when we got there. And when I went for the MOT, they were just amazed because I'd been in Texas its whole life, so there wasn't a speck of rust on this thing. Plus the left-hand drive, it was odd.
How did you like the warm English beer?
I'm not a big beer drinker, but the one bad habit I did pick up was single malt Scotch. I learned then that Scotch, redheads, and midgets are proof that God truly loves us. We had a little old Scottish guy ran the bar at Lakenheath, and I'd go up and order a Scotch, and he said, "I guess you want ice and water?" And I said, "No, I want it straight like God meant for me to drink it." And he goes, "You're a fine lad."
How different was it flying in the UK and Europe versus what you'd experienced in the US?
Well, in the US, it's just one set of rules. And they had these low fly routes. There's only certain places, only certain routes you could fly low level in the States. Now, there were a lot of them, but, you just flew the same ones over. I mean, there's ones around Seymour Johnson I could go fly right now without the chart because I flew them so many times. UK, man, don't fly over London, don't fly over to Queen's House. Pretty much go anywhere you want. The German rules were a little restrictive. The Dutch, you couldn't mow below 1,000 feet. That was probably the hardest thing because our missions were pretty long. A lot of time we take off, we'd be flying in England, Belgium, Holland, Netherlands, maybe over into France a little bit. So you had to know, A, when you crossed the border, and B, when the rules changed. But, I mean, after you did it a while, it was okay. But as far as I love flying low level in England. It was great.
So were you up in Scotland around the locks and places like that?
Yeah, we flew up in Scotland mainly. We had 9 squadron. They were flying Tornadoes. And a lot of times we get noise complaints called in from the locals, and we go, I don't think that was us. We're pretty sure it was the Tornadoes over 9 squadron. If you call Wing Commander Jones at, blah, 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 I'm sure he would be happy to handle your inquiry. Besides, we have specific rules that prohibit that sort of activity. So it couldn't have been us.
Yeah.
But yeah, we mainly went up to north of England and Scotland.
Yeah, I've seen some really incredible YouTube footage, I think, of low-level
lock runs.
Yeah, the lock runs, which look pretty low to me.
Yeah, it's all a matter of it's all relative. It's what you're used to. First time you fly terrain following radar at night and the weather, it's, your butt's so clenched up you couldn't drive a needle up it with a sledgehammer. And after about, 6 months of doing it, it's another day at the office. I mean, you pay attention to what you're doing, but it's just the tension's not there. You get used to it.
Were you trained at all in escape and evasion?
Yeah. That's a great thing about the 111 was the escape capsule. It was great for getting out, but it was really hard to bury once you got on the ground. But yeah, you went through a week-long escape and evasion training up in outside Spokane, Washington. I did mine in February. So it was really awesome to be up there in the mountains, 10 foot of snow, being chased by gomers, and then they caught you, and then you spent a couple of days in a POW camp. And then kind of as a reward, you got to go down to Homestead next to Miami for water survival. And that's where they like parasailed you off this boat, landed in the water, got on the raft, floated around for a couple of hours, and they come pick you up.
And did you, because with some of the RAF guys I've interviewed, there's the sort of semi-roughing up in interrogation. And
yeah, man, they got a lot of money invested in me. They're not going to smack me around too much. A lot of times you go, at least when I was in the camp, you'd piss off a guard, so they go in there to interrogate you because it was warm. The room they took into the interrogate you was nice and warm. You go, yeah, do what you want, pal, but it's not cold. So yeah, it wasn't much, to be honest with you. They taught you some techniques and stuff like that, and I'll be honest with you, the missions we were going on, it wasn't something you had to worry about.
No, we'll come on to that in a moment, Rick. But I appreciate that. You mentioned a little while earlier the F-111 escape capsule, and I guess some people listening might not realise that essentially the whole of the cockpit section is ejected and parachutes down. So you're not coming down on individual parachutes.
No, you're coming down together, sitting in your seat. And really, it's kind of nice because, one, you're not exposed to all the wind blast and stuff, and get your story straight on the way down. And you got you don't worry about you landing somewhere and the Wizzo landing someplace else and trying to get together and your crap flying all over the place. Everything is there once you hit the ground. But the other thing is, you're not hiding that thing once it gets on the ground.
And presumably these things could float as well. They had flotation aids.
Yeah, they had pumps on them where you pump the water out. They actually worked. They weren't Martin Bakers, but considering, you're basically jumping out in a Volkswagen, it was a good piece of equipment.
It's strange because I can't recall seeing that on any other military aircraft. Why did they do that with the F-111 and not the regular ejection seat?
Because basically the speed that we would be going at. And also, they originally designed the Navy was supposed to use it too, so I think that's why they did the boat part of it. Have you ever seen the videos on the escape system for the B-58?
No.
Oh, man, you need to look at those.
Okay.
They used a bear to test those.
A bear?
And what it was, instead of the whole capsule coming out, this clamshell would close over the ejection seat, and then the seat would come out, but it would be like a pod, an individual pod that the guy was inside. And so they decided that the closest thing that they could test it with, this was back in the 50s, and PETA wasn't around. So they said, we'll use bears. And so they've got this, and I've seen it on YouTube somewhere, where they're testing this thing, and they're taking this bear, and he's like all drugged up because there's no bear going to do this of his own free will. So they put him in the seat, and they strap him in, and he starts waking up. And I swear to God, right before they close down, the guy in the lab coat hands him a ho-ho, which is like a cupcake. Cupcake. This bear's sitting there, And they close the camp and it takes off. And they got cameras here because they want to show how the seat works and all that stuff. That bear's looking around. He's eating his ho-ho, thinking, that's all right. It's nice. It's warm. I wonder what that hum is. And then that seat shoots out. And then they cut to where they find him. And they open up that thing, and that bear's eyes are like saucers.
With your F-111 missions, they were nuclear, weren't they? Or you had an element of conventional as well?
We were basically there. Our primary job was deep interdiction. That, go beyond the front line and hit their supply depots, hit their airfields, hit that sort of thing. We weren't like close air or frontline stuff. We were deep strike was our primary mission. And we initially trained a lot for conventional strikes. In fact, I had a pre-planned mission that if the Great War in Europe ever kicked off, I and 7 of my close personal friends were supposed to attack this PV Ostrani field in Magdeburg in Germany. So we already had, that would have been our first plan. We already knew what my first mission would be if the Great European War ever kicked off. I mean, we were told when we got there that our goal in life was to survive a week, take as many of them with us as we could before we'd go, and try to make them use as many of their expendables as we could. And that the follow-on forces from the States would win the war.
Did you believe that?
If it had happened, yeah. Because we would have took the brunt, and then the guys coming after us would have won.
Assuming it didn't go nuclear.
Even if it went nuclear.
And what was your interpretation of winning then, if it went nuclear?
That they didn't march into America.
Right.
Sorry, England, but
yeah. So Europe would be this irradiated desert,
yeah.
But yeah.
But we'd be okay, and we'd take y'all back with us if we.
Oh, thanks.
I mean, you gotta be realistic about that stuff. I mean,
yeah.
And I'll be honest with you, I never thought it would happen because I didn't think anybody was that stupid. I've always thought that the Soviets did what they did. My degree's in foreign service, by the way. So it was a degree to get you prepared to work for the State Department. But I always thought that the Soviets did what they did. So if the next war came, they would fight it in Czechoslovakia, Poland, and Hungary, and not in the Soviet Union. That's what they wanted. Have a place to fight besides their own country. I never thought they were going to come west in an aggressive war. I never thought they would, and they did. They're more of, let me see if I can, cause a little problem here and there in the periphery and get client states to do stuff for me. They're not coming west because they knew they couldn't win.
I think they knew the consequences of that it wasn't going to end well.
And to be honest with you, most of their stuff was crap. Now, they had 1 million of them, but they just didn't have good stuff.
Yeah, it's an interesting question, that, because I think, it's almost a lot was made of the threat of the Warsaw Pact crossing the border, but in reality, and I've heard this from other people, is their equipment wasn't great. The morale, certainly of the satellite states, wasn't going to be great.
Heck, their officers and men couldn't even communicate with each other a lot of times. They grab a bunch of guys from Siberia and bring them out there. They don't speak Russian.
Yeah. People forget that, all the multiple languages in the Soviet Union, as well as the Warsaw Pact languages, for that matter.
And I'm sure there were a lot of you think Poles want to die for Russia? No.
The Poles had a beef with Russia over a number of bits of previous history as well. Yeah. So it was always going to be challenging. So you talked about your conventional mission for Magdeburg. With the nuclear missions, did you know what your target was for that?
Oh yeah, we we set. I guess I can talk about this now since it's all over. We set Nuke Alert there at Lake and Heath. Had 8 airplanes, and after I'd been there about a year, was made the Alert Force commander, so I got to command them. And we had pre-planned lines, and you go out there and you'd set for a week on alert. And if it went, you knew exactly where you were going to go, exactly what you were going to do. And
yeah. And where were you going to go?
I've had targets in Czechoslovakia, East Germany, Riga, and then there was the Murmansk run, which was one I usually got, and that was a go drop your bomb, fly a couple minutes, and jump out or ride it in. It's up to you. Take your choice, because you weren't coming back from that one.
And could you just take me through how one of those missions would play out? So you'd be in QRA.
Yeah, we'd be on alert, and the war would have kicked off already. And to be honest with you, I'd be surprised if we were still there, because we would have either been nuked by then or they would have dispersed to someplace else. But say we were still there, the hooter would go off. We'd go hop in the plane, and then they'd read us they'd read a message over the radio, and it was a series of numbers and letters. And then we had like a pad for that day, and we'd decode the message. And then we had cookies that, basically were like a pin, equivalent of a pin. And if the cookie we had matched the numbers that they gave us, we went.
So when you say cookie, this was like a sealed plastic thing that you broke in half, that had paper, that had the number within it. Yeah.
Number, yeah. And then, you take off and go do your mission.
You make it sound very straightforward, but I guess if you're...
it is. The situation that leads up to it's not.
Yeah.
The actual nuts and bolts of what you're going to do is, and not rocket science.
And how did you feel about dropping such a weapon on other people?
Hey, I drop a nuke on you, I kill you with a baseball bat. What's the difference? Dead's dead. We kill more people in Tokyo with a firebomb than we did with a nuke in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. You're just talking, a question of magnitude. Was I morally objected to it? Well, I recently did a DNA test on one of this Ancestry.com, and it turns out I come from a long line of lapsed Quakers. So it's interesting that I got the profession that I did. But, you have to be a credible threat to be a deterrent. You've got, let's be honest. I was basically a hired gun for the U.S. that they would draw or threaten to draw to get what they thought was in the best interest of the United States. And I had to be willing to dispense death and destruction in such an amount that the other guys didn't want to take it.
Yeah, coming from a long line of Quakers, I get, isn't the SAC...
We had a long line of Quakers that had been kicked out of the Quaker church, to be honest with you.
I was going to say, because I thought SAC's motto was, peace is our profession.
Yeah, war is their hobby. Civilians just don't understand us. You can't explain. Again, I'm a hired gun, and people in combat arms are hired guns, and you've got to be willing to do unpleasant things under direction. We don't go out there and do it just because we want to, but when we're ordered to do something, you got to be willing to do it, or you're not a credible threat, and you don't accomplish what you really want to accomplish, which is what peace in Europe since World War II.
Yeah. So the flight in, it's a low-level ingress with a pop-up.
It's a medium level, like Murmansk, for example, is a medium level. And this was an interesting question I always had. My route went right over top of Stockholm on the way to Murmansk, and we had to go high altitude or medium altitude because of fuel. And I always wondered if they, talked to the Swedes or what.
Yeah, because the Swedes were very protective of their territory during the.
But I guess if we've been throwing nukes back and forth, I guess all bets are off by then. They're probably glowing in the dark anyway by now, just from the fallout and stuff blowing both ways. But then you would drop down low level and fly low level into your target and drop your bomb. Or bombs. We had two.
And was it sort of like you're lobbing the bomb?
There were two deliveries. One was a toss, and you throw that thing about 6 miles away. And that's one thing that always amazed me about the 111. People talk about laser-guided bombs and how accurate, terminal guidance is. And back in the 80s, now we had digital computers then. You could take your average airplane, your average Wizzo, go out, toss a bomb from 6 miles away. That thing could go up to from 1,000 feet from where it came off up to, 26, 27,000 feet, then back down and hit the target 6 miles away. And these guys would consistently get it in within, 100, 200 feet.
Wow.
Now, you think about the difference in, the air, the temperature, the wind direction, all that stuff. Going up, down, 6 miles away, and I mean consistently get within 100, 200 feet, throwing that thing 6 miles away, never seeing the target, doing it off radar. And then the other one was to go over the level and drop them level. But mainly they like tossing them because you got the air burst.
Yeah, because if you drop them level, presumably there's some retarded detonation.
A chute comes out, and the chute comes out anyway. It kind of hangs when it does the air burst. But, yeah, I mean, unless you like going underground or something, you usually did air bursts.
Yeah. And did you ever talk to your Wizzo about what your plans were after you dropped it?
We were going to die. Afterwards. I mean, we're going to jump out in the country. I just dropped 2 nukes on. What do you think?
I don't know. I mean, with the Murmansk run, I guess you might consider flying to...
Plus, it's going to be cold as all get out up there. You don't have enough gas. Had enough gas to drop the bomb, do an escape maneuver.
Could you get to Sweden?
Oh, God, no. You'd be lucky to get outside of the city limits of Murmansk. Because that was, like I say, that was a one-wayer.
Oh, right. So that was at the extreme...
they were all one-wayers, actually. Yeah, that was at the maximum range this thing had. I mean, you weren't coming back anyway. If you thought you were, you're fooling yourself. And probably wasn't anything come back to.
You're training for that for years. And as you say, I guess what gets you through it is you think it's never going to happen.
Or if it happens, I mean, might as well get my shot in before I go. I get to throw a punch instead of just, cowering in a hole somewhere waiting for them to come get me.
I really appreciate you sharing that, Rick. Now, I think that you were alerted for some potential missions in Lebanon at one point as well.
Yeah, back before we went to Libya, we were down in Spain, Zaragoza, and they had a really nice range down there. And we've been trying for years for the Spanish to let us in down there and use it instead of having to go to Turkey all the time. Finally let us in. We're down there, and we come back from downtown one Saturday night, early Sunday morning, and there's a note on the door saying, hey, you pack up, we're going back to the Heath. And we went, yeah, right, that's going to happen. Because it was like just, scribbled note. It wasn't like an official order or anything. By God, 6 o'clock in the morning, they wake us up and back we go. And we land, and we're walking in. They go, okay, you guys can go home except you, and you. Get back in the planes. Go to Turkey. Oh, by the way, we're loading bombs on them before you go. So we flew to Turkey that same day, to Incirlik. We landed at night. They stuck us in the hangars, closed them up, made us take our squadron patches off, and made us stay on base. And supposedly we're supposed to go bomb someplace in Lebanon, but it never happened. And that happened a couple of times. And that's why we're so surprised when we actually win.
Right. Well, let's talk about Operation El Dorado Canyon. So it's 1986, and the Libyan government is accused of being part of a bombing of a nightclub in Berlin that kills U.S. servicemen.
The LaBelle disco, and then they also blew up a TWA plane.
So Ronald Reagan, who's the president at the time, orders an operation to bomb Libya, which is called Operation El Dorado Canyon. When were you first aware that you might be on that mission?
Like I said, this happened so many times. You were kind of like, the on the team. And so if you were, like, you couldn't go to London and you couldn't leave the base, and everywhere you went, you had to tell command posts where you were. So actually, it's the Saturday before the raid, we were having a Anglo-American friendship do at the officers club. And when commander kept leaving, and he'd come back, and he'd leave, and he'd come back. And then we were supposed to have a Salty Nation, which was a pretend war or exercises that we do about once a quarter. They last a week. We had one of those starting Sunday. So we got called in, and we go in, and that the Sunday before, the day before, is when we were told we were actually going. So probably 24 hours.
And what sort of intel did you have on the targets, and what targets were you aiming for?
There was his house. There was a sports center, which had a pool that I guess they used to train frogmen. And then there's Tripoli Airport in the south. Those were the 3 targets. And then the Navy did something in Benghazi.
I mean, you mentioned these other operations that got cancelled at the last minute. When did you know that this was actually going to be for real?
When we walked out to the planes.
And what about I mean, obviously this is different to some of the, well, it was a different mission to what you were probably expecting to do. What were your instructions if you were shot down?
We weren't given any.
So it's just make it up as you go along.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. I mean, I'm trying to think. I don't think anybody tried to make it to the water, I think was the main thing. If we got on over the water, we would be okay because the Navy would come get us. Otherwise, it's just, you had your standard escape and evasion things that you did if you got shot down.
Yeah, so you'd have a location beacon or something with you.
Yeah, I mean, you had to, get away from the capsule, go high, make contact, and then try to find a place for them to pick you up. But they didn't have like any safe areas or anything like that.
I mean, it just makes you think. I mean, whoever thought of that capsule didn't really think through the whole escape and evasion piece, did they?
Well, the main thing is survival. You go out of that airplane at 100 feet going 1.2, 1.3, you're not living through that. So I guess it's, 6 1 half does the other.
Yeah. So how long was the flight?
I was the second one in the air, last one on the ground, and I was like 14.2, I think.
Wow. I think that was the longest mission.
It was the longest tactical bombing mission in history. I mean, we could have flown that thing from the States in that amount of time. So
was that even longer than the Black Buck flight from Ascension Island to the Falklands?
Oh, God, no. I think that one was like 20-something, wasn't it? They had an airplane they could walk around in that one, though. And again, after 8 hours, 7, 8 hours, it's just a matter of degree.
Yeah. You're, coming through Gibraltar, let's say, you're getting close to Libya. What's going through your mind at that point? Because you've trained and trained for something like this, but this is where people are actually going to be firing at you and trying to get you down.
Okay, people are going to think I'm nuts. But I think I and the vast majority of people in that flight were going, well, thank God we're finally going to get to do what we've been trained to do.
I can believe that. I can honestly believe that because that's been your whole life for. Yeah,
and there really hadn't been anything, other than, Panama and Grenada before that. And we thought, man, we're never going to get to do this. And we don't want to do nukes. And this is about as good as it gets, one off against some third world country that probably isn't that big a threat to us.
But you have something happen that means that you have to abort.
Yeah, the part of the terrain following radar is a radar altimeter that comes on, and it gives information to the terrain following radar and the autopilot. And when we're let down, it wouldn't lock on. And the rules of engagement were if everything wasn't working, you had to turn around and come back. So
you must have been cursing at that moment.
Yeah, I and the maintenance officer had a in-depth discussion when I got back.
Yeah, I could imagine.
82 airplanes, and you can't give us 18 flyovers.
Right. Yeah,
But anyway, I mean, they did the best job they could do. It just happens. Plus, that was a long, bloody flight.
Yeah, to then have to, come back. So presumably you drop your bombs in the med rather than carry them back, or yeah. Now I understand that one of the F-111s was brought down over Libya.
Yeah, that was Rando and Paul Lawrence's airplane. They were number 5, I think, in a string of 6. That's, to this day, I do not understand that plan.
Can you just take us through the plan?
Well, if you go back and you look at linebacker in Vietnam War, B-52s, same IP, same target run, same altitude, same axis of attack, same airspeed. You could be the worst AAA guy on the face of the earth, and after about 4 or 5 guys come through, you got your timing down. And we're sitting there going, we're looking at this thing, and you got 6 guys going, same IP, same target, same run-in, same altitude, same airspeed. Have we learned nothing from linebacker? First guy is going to see the target. Second guy may see the target. Third and fourth guys aren't going to see anything except, big puffs of smoke and explosion and camel guts and stuff flying around all over the sky. Fifth guy's going to die. Sixth guy's probably going to die. And that's pretty much what happened. Because the guy after him almost got hit.
Right. And what number would you have been if you'd gone in?
Second. But when we went to the airport, we came from 2 different axes of attacks. 3 from the south, 3 from the east, and I was the second guy from the east. Plus, they didn't have anything down there at the airfield. There weren't any defenses down there, so, we could have taxied in and dropped those bombs off.
Yeah, it must have been quite a sobering flight back, knowing that you'd lost some of your comrades.
We lose people all the time. It was. We're sorry we lost somebody, but it's not like we don't expect it. If you're in fighters, people are going to die. It's part of the job. Comes with the big watches and the pretty girls. It just is. And you hate to get cold and callous to it, but you are. We like to say there's the 3 stages of fighter-bolic grief. Gee, that's too bad. 2, glad it's not me. 3, I wonder what he screwed up. And that's basically how we think about it.
Yeah, you have to move on.
And it happens so often. It's like a ritual thing. So Air Force kicks in and they do, all the things that you do. And it's just like, it kind of takes the edge off of it.
Because presumably flying at such low level as you did in the F-111, the attrition rate with accidents was high or not?
Yeah, when you're at 200 feet and 400 or 500 knots, you screw up, you're dying. We put 7 of them in the ground in 1 year.
Wow.
There at Lake Anita.
And that was screw-ups, mechanical failure?
Well, to be honest with you, nobody knows because, again, when you hit the ground going, like we had a guy hit, if you did, you hit the side of a granite mountain going 600 knots. You're a basic chemical element. You're not fighting anything. And a lot of it's just disorientation or TFR failed or pilot error or who knows, dead's dead.
Yeah. As the Nuclear Alert Force commander at Lakenheath, what did that role entail?
Well, I was in charge of all the crews, all the maintenance, and all the security. And we were like our own little. Actually, it's kind of like being in a joint, because you're in double fenced barbed wire compound. You can't go out except unless you're on parole, and you pretty much stay there. And they control who comes in, who goes out, and just making sure everything. Because nukes are a zero screw up business. And so that your main thing is to make sure nobody messed up.
Yeah. I've been in the QRA at Upper Hayford because that's still preserved.
Yeah, it's the same. They're the same, pretty much the same. We'd get up every morning. We had our own mess hall. We'd eat, go out, change over to classified because our cookies and our code sheets changed every day. Pre-flight the airplane, say hello to the bombs, talk to the crew chief, talk to the cop. You had your own cop at your shelter, and we had a system where normally they would look at your pass, your card to make sure that you were who you said you were before they let you in. But on a scramble, which we did probably at least once a week, practice scrambles, you'd run in, you want to get going as fast as you can. So we had a number, like say the number of the day was 8. And if the guard showed you a 5, he showed him a 3 back.
Right.
So I always told my guys, I don't give a crap what the number is. When I come by you, I'm showing you a 1. So you better be showing me whatever 1 minus is.
Yeah.
Okay, sir. And that's what we do.
The last thing you want to be doing is trying to do some maths when you...
Yeah. Okay, 8 months. Sometimes they forget what the dang number is. And I said, I'm showing you a 1, I'm going in. And if they just forgot what you do, is you stop, you'd actually show them your alert pad ID. It took a second. So it wasn't that big a deal. Then, Darren, after we changed out the classified and talked to the deck apes and the cops, we'd go back in and, first day or 2 of the week, you pretty much stay in the facility and study your line. Then, if you were an instructor, you'd go give simulators. You had like your own truck. It had like the cop lights on it. Or you went back to your office and worked. And then after about, normal duty hours were over, you'd go to the club and get something to eat. Or we had our own mess hall there. The cooks would come out and cook for us. Had our own gym, so we got to play basketball or something and lift weights. And had our own theater, so we get to see the first run Filipino kung fu movie that they had going around the bases, and or watch TV, and both BBC One, BBC Two, and ITV, and go to sleep, do it again, and we'd be on for a week. And if something come up, I'd always, I'd have to, take care of it. They'd tell me if they were like doing maintenance on an airplane, if a plane was down, or they had to swap out a cop for some reason. And okay, but I was just somebody that could the wing commander could have to yell at if something happened out there.
Yeah.
But very few things happened out there because people were serious around those things. That was a career ender.
I've interviewed one of the cops at Upper Hayford, and that was...
God, their jobs suck.
That was interesting, yeah.
I wouldn't do that for all the tea in China. I'd rather be a prison guard than do that. But one time, we were having a Salty Nation coming up, so we were going to change over early on a Sunday. We usually change over on Mondays. But they were going to change over on Sunday to get the crew in before the Salty Nation started.
Sorry, you said Salty Nation. What is that?
That's the name for the exercises that we do to get prepared for our operational readiness inspections. It's just something they came up with. I call it something. So we're out there playing basketball, and one of the Wizzos twists his ankle, like really bad. And it's about 30 minutes from changeover, and we're going, what are we going to do? I said, well, I'll tell you what we're going to do. We're going to take him, get this pilot, stuff his butt in his cockpit, and we're going to wait until his relief comes out. Because if you think I'm calling the wing commander and telling him that I get to do an early changeover because this numbnuts twisted his ankle, they'll never let us play basketball out here ever again. So we stuck them in the airplane and waited till it changed over, and then we took him over to the hospital. He's okay.
Brilliant. Can you tell me anything about the war games?
Yeah, they were, again, we called them Salty Nations, and they would start out always at about 3 o'clock Sunday or Monday morning. The hooter would go off, and then we'd do a recall. And what that was is the command post would call the squadron commanders. Squadron commanders would call their assistants and their ops guys, and there'd be like maybe 3 officers before them. And it was like a pyramid recall. Everybody would call somebody else. And then after you called the guy below you, you'd come into the base and you'd start. You bring all your stuff. And it ran for like, 12-hour shifts, mainly because that's the duty day limit, was 12 hours for flyers. First thing you do is you come in, and then they give you an intel brief. There'd be a scenario like the war. We'd fight the war up in Scotland normally. And like the Hadrian's Wall would be the FEBA, Forward Edge of Battle area. And then all the bad guys would be in Scotland. And they do things like they give us intel briefs where the threats was. And it's kind of interesting. Sometimes they go, okay, if you see a green bus, that's a column of T-34s. So we were, to look at stuff. So if we saw one of those, we were supposed to report that when we got back. Just to give you something to get used to looking for stuff. Because, that is one of your things you should be doing when you're rooting around back in bad guy country, is seeing where everybody is. And we get our missions, and we'd fly them. Evaluators would be with us. They'd chase us. They'd be following us all over the place. They would get the RAF and the Belgians and the Dutch, although you didn't have to ask them. They come do it even when they weren't supposed to. Would come in and attack us on our way up to where we were going or coming back. About Wednesday, things weren't going really well. It was time for what was called a SELREL, selective release of nuclear weapons. So we'd send 1 or 2 out and drop nukes, and then that would obviously cause the big war to kick off. And then Friday morning is when we had the Elephant Walk, and that's where they loaded every airplane we had on base that would fly with, they'd load the nukes. They'd load the practice nukes, which didn't have anything in them. And then they download them, and then we go out and we'd fly, simulated missions. And every airplane on base would take off. It was awesome watching these things. Like 70 airplanes taking off at once.
Wow.
Well, like one after the other. And we'd win, and then come back and debrief and take the rest of the weekend off. And then, once a year, either USAFE would come over, the United Air Forces Europe, our guys would come over and do an operational readiness inspection, which is basically the same thing. Oh, and we'd have like airfield attacks and stuff like that. And they'd blow up squadron buildings, and they'd kill people and do kill removal and all that kind of stuff to see how you'd react, or, how you would operate without the squadron.
So did they simulate like a ground attack on the airfield as well?
Oh, yeah. What they do is they'd have like RAF or the Dutch and the Belgians come in and actually attack the field, and then the evaluator on the ground would set off like a smoke bomb at where supposedly this guy dropped his bombs. And then you go over there, and he'd hand you a card, and he said, okay, this thing is like 2/3 destroyed, and there's like 50 casualties and that kind of stuff. Or he'd point around, okay, you're dead. And then you're out. So USAFE would give us one a year, and then on alternate years, NATO would come in and do it.
And what was the difference with NATO versus?
It's more fun. It was more fun with NATO. Those boys had the big picture. In fact, we had a NATO TACAVAL. Last one I was at was a NATO TACAVAL, and for some reason they sent a team over from the States, and they hardly ever did that. It was usually USAFE guys, but they sent TAG guys over for this NATO TACAVAL for some reason. Never understood that. And these guys had no earthly idea what we did or how we operated. NATO guys did. So anyway, we go through our drill, and come Friday, we get in, and man, we're smoking this thing. We're kicking butt. It's the best TACAVAL we have ever done in our life. And it turns out we had the best TACAVAL of any wing in Europe that year. So we're Friday we're patting ourselves on the back, thinking about what good guys we are, and then the TAC guy says, 8:00 in the morning, 3510 inspection, all fighter squadrons, and 3510 inspection is dress. And, if you've got your haircut, you have the right uniform. I don't know if we're not like the RAF. We wear blues or dress blues for an official photo about every 4 years and their funeral. It's the only time we wear them. We never wear blues. But this clown wanted every pilot in his blues, dress blues, open ranks, inspection that Saturday morning. It was a fiasco. Because they're like guys who were out, fighter pilots are fighter pilots. And there were guys that had blues from like 3 sets ago, had the old outside kangaroo pockets on them. I mean, those things hadn't been legal for like years, but that's all the guy had. And we just got ripped on the 3510 inspection. We failed it. So they're doing the out briefing, and the NATO guy who's in charge puts up his slides and he goes, okay, you guys have been the best in Europe in this, 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 as he goes through each one of the things that they evaluate us on. Gets to the 3510 inspection, he goes, but apparently you gentlemen don't know how to dress, but we'll just go pilot that now. And that was the end of it. It just typical bloody American Air Force.
Well, I mean, you mentioned the other NATO forces. What was it like working with those other NATO forces?
Well, I got to go over to they were doing some kind of deal over. It was mainly a command post exercise, and it was over in Maastricht, in Holland, and it was in this cave. It's kind of neat, and it involved us. Actually, French were at this one too. It surprised me. French guys, us, Belgians, Dutch, Germans, Brits, and so they sent me and another guy over there, and basically we wrote air tasking orders. They'd come down, here's the targets. You decide, what wing was going to cover what target and what bombs they were going to use, and then you write the order and send it out. And everybody there was a colonel or above, except me and my guy. We were both captains. And this old Dutch Air Force general was running the place. And then, we'd have like a 2-hour lunch, and it'd be like, China, linen, white linen, and wine. And it was just odd. But yeah, I mean, we got along with especially RAF. We got along with the Royal Air Force just fine. They're the ones we miss. A lot of times we go up to, we take the 111s up and land and let them practice servicing them and loading them out, just so they could get, in case we ever had to divert in there after the war, they would know how to load the bombs and put the gas in the planes and, to oil them up. So we used to call that Lucas for lunch. And we'd fly up like a RAF Lucas and hand it over there to them for a couple of hours. We go to the club and have a gentleman's lunch, come back and get it and try to figure out what it was they were saying, because they were all Scottish people. And of course, we technically belonged to the RAF until the war kicked off. We had a wing commander Mike, we used to call him, where if you did something send against the mother country, you got to go talk to Wing Commander Mike. In one time, and I was in stand eval, I gave flight evaluations, and we'd had a long period of bad weather. So we hit a week where the weather was good. So I called one of the squadrons. I said, hey, you give me 8 airplanes, I'll give you 17 check rides. And said, yeah, okay. So we got that scheduled up. And then I called Lucas. And another great thing about flying in England was you could attack active airfields. You just call up the air traffic control saying, like, hey, this is Major Shreve out at Lakenheath. I'm going to do an airfield attack at Lucas at 12:05 Z on Friday. They go, okay. And what they'd do is they'd stop flying in the area for like plus or minus 2 minutes of that, clear out the airspace for you. And then I asked the guy, I said, call 111 Squadron and tell them we're coming. tell them to try to stop us. He goes, okay. So they called that. So we took off and we scheduled some bomb runs on some local ranges. And we're flying low level to get up to Leuchars. And we see this steam engine in the countryside. And man, I tell you, steam engine to fighter pilot is like a car to a dog. Whatever you're doing, you stop and you chase it. Because you remember seeing the old World War II pictures where they
the camera gun film.
Smoke come up and they blow up. So we come in, this thing's pulling into a station, and it's an old steam engine. I mean, an old timey one. So we roll in and do a bunch of bomb runs on it, and then bugger off up to Leuchars and have our mess around. We play silly buggers with 111 Squadron for a while, and then we come back and we land. We come in, go up to the desk, and the guy goes, you up there, low fly 14, which is Yorkshire? And I went, yeah, maybe. Why? He said, well, I just got a call from some guy at London Weekend TV, and he's really pissed. I went, what? He said, they were filming an episode of Sherlock Holmes up there. And when they pulled into the station, they were attacked by a bunch of American airplanes. So apparently, since the F-111 is not indigenous to Edwardian Lean, it kind of ruined their thing. I went, the guy goes, well, it's on the notice board. And I went, is it? I went, look, my God, yeah, it is. So he says, okay, go see Wing Commander Mike. I went, all right. So I took my Whizzle with me, which is a young lieutenant. He ain't been there about a year. So we go in. Wing Commander Mike kind of sitting back in his he kind of looked like a 50-year-old David Mitchell. If you remember what he looks like, if he had like gray hair and stuff. Anyway, so he's leaned back, kind of this smile on his face, waiting for me to whip out some big, long, involved story. And I just went in and saluted and went, sir, I was the flight lead of that offending flight. That notice was on the board. I read it. For some reason, it just didn't register. It was me. I have no excuse. And he stops for a minute and he goes, well, that certainly is refreshing. And he thinks for another minute. And then he makes the sign of the cross and goes, go and sin no more. And that was all we ever heard
Brilliant. Of. What, I mean, the RAF commander, what was his role at the base?
He's a liaison. He's a liaison. It's an RAF base, man. I mean, it's his base. We're guests.
Was it his final say-so as to whether you took off on a mission or not?
No. But he can make trouble for us. We were there as guests of the Queen. And so it wasn't our base. Not our base, not our airspace, not our country.
Yeah. No, I remember they were always called RAF, whatever, Lakenheath, Upper Heyford. There must have been a number of times in your flying career when you thought that the result of your flight was not going to be good.
Oh, you mean times I thought I was going to meet Jesus or Odin or the devil?
Well, whoever you think you were probably going to meet. Can you tell me about any of those?
Well, one time I was up, we're flying up to Scotland, and I was giving this guy's check ride. And we're in this lock, and there's like granite mountains on both sides of us. And the weather starts coming down, as it often did up there. And the clouds start coming down. He goes, I'm going to route abort, which means we're going to stop flying low level, and he's going to fly straight ahead and, get until we get above the altitude of anything around us. And then we'd call radar and get an IFR instrument clearance. The theory being was, we call it the big sky concept. The chances, if I tried purposely to run into an airplane, I probably couldn't do it 5 times out of 10. Probably miss. So the chances of you hitting one accidentally is a heck of a lot less than you flying under the ground, which is 100%. So that's why we did the route aborts where we fly straight ahead. So he starts doing the right thing. He paddles off the terrain following radar, starts pulling up. I get in on the radar to look to see if I see any airplanes in front of us. And all of a sudden, for some reason, this idiot decides to try to turn around inside the lock. So he's got like 5-6 Gs on the airplane. My head's slammed into the radar scope. I'm screaming at him to roll out because we're not going to make it. We don't have enough turn radius to turn inside the lock. So I reach over and just physically knock him off the controls, lean across there, throw the wings all the way out so I can get some more lift, roll out and pull as hard as I can. And we go up into the clouds. And I'm looking on the radar, and I can see the side of the mountain coming to us. It's marching down the scope. And it got so close, I couldn't tell any difference between where it started and where it stopped. And I was expecting any minute now for that, for us to hit the mountain. And we luckily scraped across the top of it and got out. And, unfortunately, I forgot to turn the tape recorder off. So there's about 54 seconds of me calling this guy everything I can think of, and I don't use the same word twice. So we have these aircrew meetings every Friday, about once a month. And if something like that happens, they'll play it in front of everybody so that you can. They didn't care about your self-esteem back then. And then another time I was over in Turkey, getting ready to drop a bomb, do a toss. We're down like 200-300 feet, going about 700. And I hit a turkey buzzer down there. And I mean, it's like, those things are like 40-pound birds. And it just exploded in the windscreen. And I'm sitting there thinking, I wonder what that was. And if it had happened 6 months earlier, I'd been dead, because they just put in new bird resistant windscreens in, because they'd lost a lot of airplanes from hitting birds like that low level. And as it was, it started to crack. But it held, and we got back and landed.
Wow. That could happen to you at any time. So you didn't presumably dwell on much on those, or you tried to learn from them.
We're like dogs. And I mean, eat it, kill it, or mate with it. We don't have deep thoughts about stuff. Just don't. Which is good for our profession, I guess, but kind of makes it boring as people, I guess. But I mean, people just, and that's the other thing. Like, one of the biggest differences I found in the military and the civilian world. In the military, you go brief, go fly a mission, hour, 2-hour mission, come back, and you debrief for like 3, 4, 5 hours. You spend about 10 minutes on what went right, because great, that's what you get paid for. And the rest of the time you would spend going over what went wrong, what you screwed up, and what you were going to do not do that again. And I mean, it got brutal. And I've sat there and told colonels in their faces that they had screwed up and got us killed, had been in combat, and they would take it. But the great thing about it was, once you stepped out of that room, it's done. It's gone. You know what you did. You know what you're going to do. Take care of it.
So did you fly again with that guy in the lock?
No.
Right.
Because he was like a student.
Oh, okay. Right.
And he tried to kill me.
Yeah.
So he didn't do well on that flight.
No. Certainly didn't get top marks.
No. And I specifically brief people. I go, okay, one of the things you can't do is try to kill me. You scare me, but you can't try to kill me.
Yeah. How long did you remain in the Air Force until?
Almost 14 years. 87, 80. I think 88 is when I got out.
And then what did you move on to?
I went to Pan Am.
From flying an F-111 to flying a 747, let's say, must be a real...
Well, I went to interview with Pan Am. Part of the things that you had to do was you had to do a simulator flight. And, they got like 737s and 727s and DC-10s and 747s. So what do you take your sim flight in? 747. I'm a fighter pilot. I'm sitting there going, okay, first of all, I don't use wheels. I use sticks. And what are these extra 2 throttles for? And you sit there and you turn the wheel, and then it'd go like 1 potato, 2 potato, before the thing would actually react, because there was so much mass to the plane. It's like taxiing a building. But I did okay. There were like probably 300 of us there, and I couldn't tell, a bit of difference amongst the three. We're basically the same guy. My interview was with 3 old flying boat guys. They called them clipper skippers. Flew the flying boats back in the 30s.
Wow.
So I'm sitting there, and the guy looks at my resume and throws me a approach plate and says, "What's that mean?" And I told him. And he's looked at my resume and says, "Oh, you were in England." I went, "Yes, sir." He goes, I spent the next 55 minutes listening to World War II war stories, and walked out and went, well, either I'm done or I'm hired. I mean, and I was like, I think they hired like 20 of us out of 300. So went down to Miami for 727 engineer training. And about the second or third day that we're down there, they call us all into this conference room, and there's our union guys in there, a couple of company guys, and a couple of suits, and they go, in the history of Pan Am, there have been times when the U.S. government has called upon us to fly special missions for them. And we do. We have, and we will continue to do so. The reason we're here today is we want to know if you want to volunteer to fly these missions. You don't have to if you don't want to. There's no extra compensation. There's no stigma attached if you don't want to do it. But we just want to let you know that we do these things, and do you want to do it if the opportunity comes? So, yeah, okay, I'll do that. And that's how we ended up doing Desert Storm. But I did 7-2 out of New York for a while. And then the neatest thing was I got to go over to Berlin for a couple of years on the 7-2. And this is back when the wall was still up.
So you're having to fly low level there, aren't you, because of the air corridors?
Yeah, go one of the 3 quarters. In my very first flight in Berlin, where I think it was the Central Corridor, we were coming down, and I'm looking outside, and stuff's starting to look familiar. And I was talking to the captain. I said, "This river up here, is it like bend down to the south and then back to the east, and then there's like a railroad bridge combination?" He goes, "Yeah." He says, "And there's like 4 power lines that cross it further on down." "Yeah." He says, "Is like this big castle thing off the left?" He goes, "Yeah." "What have you been down here for?" And I went, "No." He says, "Is there a big airfield down here?" And we flew right over the top of that airfield at Magnum.
Wow.
That was my target. How do I know this? How do I know all this stuff? And it was, from studying the target photos.
That was an episode from the podcast Cold War Conversations. Please search for and follow Cold War Conversations wherever you get your podcasts. To make it a little easier, we put a link in the episode notes.